All right, so here we'll talk about organizational development. And organizational development, by definition, planned organization-wide effort. See, I like this. Rather than trying to find an individual problem and fix it, it's like let's look at the organization as a whole, look at all of the inputs, out of the outputs, and consider the organization as an entire package rather than a bunch of smaller units. So planned organization-wide effort to increase organizational effectiveness through behavioral science. All right there. So it's helping the employees and the organization, since the employees are part of and it's changing everything. So total involvement by the organization is really necessary for OD. It should be, supported by top managers, but it should be supported by the employees as well. By the way, don't think it's just from the top. Successful organizational development tends to be flexible, tends to be global, right? It's focused, moves the organization to a broader way of thinking. Successful organizational development requires that the human portion of the organization be deeply considered. Often organizational development, see, because what happens is organizations, just like people or marriages or families or something, can fall into a rut, and you get the same type of thinking, same type of thinking, and sometimes you need to rethink the fundamental assumptions, for example, that you're running your company with. Okay. Organizational development is about continuous learning. That is to say, it's not just a one-time change, but it's something that is an ongoing process. Okay? Be responsive to the needs of your customers, be responsive to changes, be proactive. Now, that's hugely important. In other words, change your company even before the market has gotten there. Anticipate the market. So here we got Levine again, Kurt Levine, and he talks about this notion, and he says, okay, organizational change will only happen when forces for change are more powerful than forces against change. So you see in the top left box there, forces, I can't read it, it's too small, but maybe you have better eyes than me. Forces for change on the left side have a total push of 10. Forces against change on the right have a push of 11. And so given this example, the organization is not going to change. Okay, it's just the way it is. So for organizational change to occur, it's often easier, rather than trying to push forces for change, instead start breaking down some of the forces against change. Okay, some of the employees that are stubborn, right? Not of that nature. So you find that in Levine's model, he uses these words to describe the organizational change. Unfreezing, where the status quo that your company currently has is broken down, the system is opened up, it's ready for change. Moving is the act of organizational change itself. And again, change might occur in terms of manufacturing processes or something, but ultimately will be reflected in the attitudes, values, and behaviors of the employees. Okay, so to work its way down into the individual unit or worker, and then refreeze. And so now that you've got your new equilibrium point, let's balance it back out. So we got Levine's change model here with the unfreezing, moving, and refreezing. And it's being compared here to the action research model. And the action research model in a lot of ways reminds me of the scientific method. So if you've ever seen the scientific method, what you find is that, you've got outside information being fed into the system coming into the left. And then once you get into the system here, just like in the game of science, you gather data, you generate theories, you test theories, etc. But in this case, it's the same idea. You get information from outside, and once this information from outside is fed into the system, then all of a sudden you use the data that you gather from your own system as feedback and information to what you can and should do moving forward. As we said, organizational development needs to be a continuing process, or successful one needs to be a continuing process. So what kinds of interventions are out there? And so we'll talk about a little bit about each one of these different types of interventions driving organizational change. Survey feedback is pretty straightforward, right? You're going to go to your company, both the managers, upper level, lower level, etc., but employees at the lowest levels as well, and administer surveys. The key, I think, is pretty important is that they're anonymous. That fact is, if you're asking the regular employee, their opinions of how things work, they're not going to tell you that manager X is a micromanager and nothing gets done because he won't sit back and let others do their job, right? It's just that's the nature of it. So it needs to obviously be anonymous. Team building. I don't know. We've seen some silly team building exercises in places like on The Simpsons and everything else. I don't know. Maybe we've seen the team building exercises to build trust where, oh, fall back and I'll catch you. Well, you know what? Team building exercises have the potential to bring about organizational change. Um, Perhaps team building can be used to figure out, expectations for different positions or the responsibility those positions hold. It's possible to improve not just subordinate supervisor relationships, but just employee to employee relationships. Because the fact is, if you don't get along with the person next to you, the conflict you have, you won't share information, you won't share, whatever you've got. It just doesn't work. You can use it to improve, of course, the way decision making works, especially as we know, group decision making, like we talked earlier. Five heads is definitely not the same as five individual heads, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do, developing visions, and we'll talk more about that in later slides. But clearly, unity and things of this nature can be built with team building exercises. Um, a technique, organizational development intervention, rather, that came up in the 80s, came out of Japan, was gain sharing or profit sharing. And when profit sharing first came up, I think a lot of businesses jumped on the profit sharing really quickly and didn't really totally think it out. Um, in recent history, there's been a pullback a little bit, but still, a lot of American organizations use gain sharing or profit sharing. And so, what happens is basically you pay employees based on productivity. You set up productivity goals. If we meet this goal, then bang. If we meet this goal, then bang. And so, we see this. Unfortunately, what we see though is that the most the people that are most likely to be involved in the profit sharing or gain sharing are things like CEOs, okay, and upper level management. And so we hear cases where gain sharing, profit sharing, what happens is they have particular, you know, goals. If you hit this goal, then you as a CEO get $1 million bonus or something. And you hear about companies that are just like being driven into the ground and are on their death knell, but the CEOs are still getting these massive payouts because they hit some kind of performance goal, right? Oh, the performance goal was to build 1,000 widgets. Yeah, but you're not selling them. You got no profit on them. Something like this. The company's dying, but you hit a performance goal, you get your raise. So it's an interesting idea, and I can imagine if done properly. But from what I've read, many companies just don't bring it down to the individual worker level. Technostructural interventions. Well, re-engineering is to fundamentally rethink the processes, and it turns out that technology is expensive. It's ever changing, and so what might happen is you could have very inefficient systems that are outdated. Fact is, any organization probably subscribes to 25, 30, 40 different programs or more and has to pay annual fees for them. Well, maybe you would restructure or re-engineer this by rethinking the way that you do, I don't know, let's say, for example, do corporate payroll, okay? Running the computers that do corporate payroll is very expensive. Is there a better way to simplify the process? Would there be a better place too? So it's to re-engineer the way things are done currently in order to make them more efficient. So some different types of organizational designs. I've got three different images here on types of organizational designs. And here's a functional organizational design, and it's functional because the organization is divided by function. Okay, you've got the marketing, manufacturing, marketing, R&D, finance. And so what happens in this type of organizational design is that as you move your way down to like the northern region coordinator and the southern region coordinator, nobody talks to anybody. Okay, that these get very narrowly focused as you move your way down and isolated. And so information that is generated doesn't get flowed because clearly the northern region coordinator for marketing probably learned something that the southern region coordinator for marketing could possibly use, right? And if it's too narrowly focused, then nobody can share information. In a product-based organizational design, a single company, and by the way, didn't even mention it. One of the most important reasons that we need organizational design is because companies that get too narrowly focused or too run in the same way for too long find out that the world changes on them. And so, the classic example was the Xerox company, and they did one thing and they did very, very, very well, and they provided copies. Okay, but many of you don't even know the Xerox company, but they were a big player. But the market moved, they didn't move with it. Okay, they did not move to more internet based. They did not, and so all of a sudden this very major company, it would have been top of the Nasdaq, but no, not anymore, gone. So companies often need to focus on multiple products, and in some kind of logical way it makes sense to put one vice president in charge of a single product, and then do R&D, marketing, etc. And in a lot of ways, the manufacturing of product A is different from the manufacturing of product B. I'll admit that. But at the same time, product A and product B are probably not like night and day. They're probably not two completely different products. There's probably at least some parts of the supply chain, for example, for product A that would overlap with the supply chain for product B. And so given this design, any work that vice president for product A does on, making an efficient supply chain does nothing for B or C. Okay, so it isolates and creates a lot of issues with this. Now here's an interesting organizational design, a matrix design, and this matrix design is pretty beautiful. See, we've got product A, B, C down the left side, and VP of manufacturing, marketing, etc. on the right. I think you would have the best overlap between best information sharing and everything else. But the problem is it feels like the only real way to get this type of organizational design is if you were building it from scratch, if you had nothing to work with. This would be very hard to do because if you had, because many companies have either functional or product based at this time, and so how do you oh, sorry, you're going to have to completely move and go someplace. It'd be awful hard to implement it into an existing corporation, company, or organization, actually. So organizational transformation is a little bit different. And this is like a vision. And sometimes CEOs are brought in for their vision. Sometimes CEOs are brought in for their, marketing sense or whatever. But sometimes for vision. And a vision is sort of like changing the entire mission statement of a company. Now, companies, for-profit companies, generally speaking, the main reason they exist is for profit, right? But you know what? There is more to the purpose of an organization than just to make a profit. And so perhaps if you alter the vision of the organization, you might in fact further that fundamental mission of making a profit. Okay? Kind of an interesting idea. But I personally have been at places where a vision was pushed from above and was not necessarily shared by people below. And so a mission in some way is like an ideal, let's say. And if I have a different set of ideals than what above me, Yeah, we'll just leave it alone because I don't want to name names. Okay, no names. So anyway, what we find is that all organizations have culture. We talked about this earlier. I don't remember where, but beliefs, values, norms, expectations that's shared. And so if you want to change the culture of the organization with a vision or something like this, you got to be very careful because the previous way of doing things is not just physical behaviors, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of life, okay? And so all of a sudden you find that it needs to be embraced by everybody in order for it to be moving. You need a support system. And you need to make sure new hires are immediately socialized into the new culture. Okay? And look at this. I like this. Conduct changes with rights of the employees in mind. If you don't take into account that you got to get your individual employees on board with your vision, or it is not going to work. You're just going to have conflict. All right, so we've got one last topic left. We're going to talk about the future. Where is IOSite going moving forward? Okay, so I'll see you later for that one.